Good evening from Washington. I'm Larry O'Connor. And what was supposed to be a routine plea deal in a Delaware federal court turned into high drama as Hunter Biden's lawyers clashed with the judge and clashed with prosecutors. It seemed like Hunter Biden's lawyers didn't know what they were pleading to, or the prosecutors didn't know what they were asking Hunter Biden to plead to. The judge certainly didn't know what was going on. The plea deal was thrown out, then it was reconstructed, and then it was thrown out again, with Hunter Biden finally pleading not guilty to those tax charges that the IRS has been investigating for years. What is this all about? And what did we learn today about how serious this investigation apparently is? Well, let's bring in a man who has forgotten more about proceedings like this than most people on cable news tonight will ever know. He is the former U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. He's Joe DeGeneva. Joe, I mean, in your experience, have you ever had to deal with something like this?
No. And you know why? Because when I was the United States Attorney for the District of Columbia, before we went into a courtroom, we knew what we were doing, and we were honorable with the court and the defense attorneys on the other side. What happened in Delaware today is an example of what happens when you have a politically corrupt United States attorney and a defense team that's willing to play ball with him. And a pretty disgraceful performance by all the attorneys involved in the case, but particularly the United States Attorney for the District of Delaware. Sad to say, it happened in my hometown, Wilmington, Delaware, one of the most disgraceful moments in the history of the Department of Justice. David Weiss apparently did a wink and a nod with Latham and Watkins, which is the very expensive defense firm which Hunter Biden hired. What he did was, it looks like that what he and Latham agreed that they would say one thing and actually be agreeing to another. But since we've never seen the original plea deal, it's never been made public, which is disgraceful when you think about a matter of this moment in our history. And so we don't really know what the original terms of the plea were.
It appeared that the judge started pulling on some threads, started asking about this, and it was revealed that there is still an ongoing investigation into other matters with regard to Hunter Biden, which, let me just pause on that moment. Why on earth would the U.S. attorneys go forward with a plea deal while they still have other charges they're investigating? I would think that they would want to hold on to every possible amount of leverage against a defendant to work out the best possible deal once the investigation has moved further down the road.
Well, of course you would if this were a real investigation, but it isn't. And in fact, these so-called ongoing investigations are a farce. There's never going to be any greater charges against Hunter Biden or Joe Biden or anybody in the family. This U.S. attorney is engaged in a subterfuge with the court, and the court senses that and understands that she's dealing with a U.S. attorney who is not to be trusted. And so therefore, what you have is this is a Toreador's dance. This is nonsensical. The U.S. attorney is making it look like there's more to be done here. And you hit it right on the head, Larry. Of course you wouldn't reach a deal at this point. That's because this was an attempt to get around all of that and throw it out. But because of all the recent publicity and all of the revelations about the FD 1023 and the two whistleblowers from the IRS, they got put in a corner. And this federal judge, to her credit, was having none of it. She was just asking a few basic questions like, okay, so now you're telling me you're not going to prosecute him for anything in the future. Is that what you're saying? Is that what you're saying? And David Weiss said, no, Your Honor, we have an ongoing investigation. Let me tell you something. That investigation is worthless because the people in that office in Delaware, including the assistant United States attorneys, they don't want to investigate this case. This is an embarrassment to Merrick Garland and the Department of Justice.
But Joe, for obvious reasons, U.S. Attorney Weiss couldn't say in open court, oh yeah, we're done with Hunter Biden. It's all sealed up. And of course, then Hunter Biden and his lawyers said, well, listen, if we're not getting, if we're still being investigated, we don't get immunity, then hell no to this deal. And the judge kept pulling on these strings, and we heard this term FARA, that there's still an investigation into FARA violations. Now, I've heard you mention that on this program before, Joe. Remind us what FARA is and what that might lead to with Hunter Biden and, frankly, his uncle and his father, the president.
FARA is the Foreign Agents Registration Act, and it requires anyone, an American citizen, acting on behalf of a foreign country, a foreign corporation, or a foreign individual to register as a foreign agent and to notify the Department of Justice of everything they're doing on the behalf of that client to influence the behavior of the United States government. And that is clearly something that Hunter Biden was doing on behalf of Burisma and people in China and Russia and Uzbekistan and Romania and Ukraine. And he never registered as a foreign agent. He clearly violated that statute. It's an absolutely outrageous thing that David Weiss is not going to charge him with that. He gave him a pass on that. And he's refusing to, and by the way, he let the statute of limitations lapse on the felony tax charges and he got an extension of the statute of limitations, but then let it expire and wouldn't extend it again. This is one of the most corrupt political investigations in the history of the Department of Justice. It makes the Teapot Dome scandal look like a traffic ticket.
By the way, if Ferris sounds familiar to our viewers, you're right. That's exactly what Robert Mueller got Paul Manafort on. And again, it brings
Correct.
us back, Joe DeGeneva, to the two different types of justice. If you're working with Trump and you're Paul Manafort, you go to jail on FARA. If you're his son, well, you get a clean slate. And then let me just pull on this one more time, because if it's true that Hunter Biden should have registered as an agent for a foreign country, and as you just described it, that means his whole job, the reason he was making money, was to influence the US government on behalf of that foreign country. Well, Joe, clearly, he was trying to influence one person in the federal government, Joe Biden. Otherwise, Hunter will have to show all these meetings he had with other officials in the US government, and he didn't have any. It was all about Joe. So if FARA is in play, that means Joe Biden is wrapped up right in the middle of all this.
Well, what you have then is Joe Biden knowingly allowing himself to be used to do things involving United States foreign policy. For example, in Ukraine, where he got Shokin, the prosecutor general, fired to get Shokin to stop investigating Burisma and his son. There you have a conspiracy by Hunter Biden and his father, the then vice president, to violate FARA and to defraud the United States government of the faithful service of the vice president of the United States. This is so easy stuff. This is shooting fish in a barrel. And David Weiss, if he were a real U.S. attorney, would have a massive grand jury investigation of the FARA violations. And the fact that he doesn't shows you how politically corrupt he is.
Joe, I only have about a minute left here, but if you're Jim Jordan, if you're the Judiciary Committee, if you're Comer in the House right now, what's your next step after these revelations?
Well, you got to issue as many subpoenas as possible, and they need to start issuing subpoenas and stop issuing letters and get as many people in to testify, including the assistant U.S. attorneys, FBI agents, everybody you can get your hands on, because this is a prosecution that deserves to be stopped. It needs to be stripped from the Delaware, and there needs to be a special counsel, but it needs to be someone of impeccable credentials. And I just don't think Merrick Garland has it in him to pick somebody who's neutral and detached. But we'll see. This is not going to get any better for the Bidens or Merrick Garland or David Weiss or Christopher Wray.
What a day. Insanity. And I'm glad we have you, Joe, to help sort it all out for us. Thanks a lot for joining us. There is more to come. You're watching O'Connor Tonight. This is the Salem News Chat. As we mentioned yesterday, Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy keeps using the I word. Here he was in an impromptu press conference saying this yesterday.
You can investigate that is through an impeachment inquiry, so the committee would have the power to get all the documents that they would need. What I said last night. Impeachment
inquiry. That's with reference to President Joe Biden. Yesterday, Karine Jean-Pierre, the press secretary at the White House, was asked about the impeachment inquiry. Watch what she had to say.
The House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, is talking more about starting an impeachment investigation into the president. What's your response to that? And if he did that, would that make any kind of cooperation with the House impossible going forward?
Look, I'm not going to get into hypotheticals. I'm not going to get into what the House Republicans may or may not do. What I can speak to is what the president is focused on. He's focused on real priorities that the American families care about. He's focused on the American family, but they want to focus on his family. They can do whatever it is that
There you go. See, that was tested through all of their focus groups and all the geniuses of the White House. See, it's just about Biden's family, and we're focused on the American family. Let's bring in one of those House Republicans who will be a key player in whatever inquiry they decide to do in the House. He's Representative Ben Cline of Virginia. Well, you see how they're trying to diminish this. You're just trying to dig up dirt on his son, Congressman Cline. Is this really just about President Biden's son and his family?
It is not just about Hunter Biden, although he is a big player in what is a larger question about a sitting vice president and a sitting now president engaging in a pay-to-play operation with his family members, access to outside interests for large sums of money, not just from any countries, but from adversaries of the United States. So these are very big questions. And we're going to be getting to the bottom of it, whether it's through the Oversight Committee and James Comer or Homeland Security. And we have Secretary Mayorkas before Judiciary right now. And we're following up on the committee's investigation that they've been involved in for some time.
If you flip over to the other news programs tonight, certainly the ones that lean in a different political direction than this one does, you'll hear apologists there on the panel saying, well, there's no evidence. There's no evidence. There's just allegations, but no evidence. Sir, I don't know about you, but I saw some testimony last week that looked pretty much like evidence. I saw that document from the FBI involving the testimony of a confidential human source that sure looks like evidence. Have you seen evidence of impeachable offenses?
Absolutely. I was a prosecutor for many years, and testimony is evidence. And the testimony that we have is very disconcerting and raises several issues because it is evidence of violations of the law. And we have to follow those facts wherever they lead.
In any Washington, D.C. scandal over the decades, there's always three components to it: the crime, the cover-up, and the obstruction of justice. Based on what you've seen from the FBI and the way they have neglected any kind of serious investigation into what the IRS whistleblower said last week, and also the 1023 form that Senator Grassley exposed, do you believe that there is active obstruction of justice going on right now, especially considering that 1023 was redacted at the beginning by Christopher Wray, and I don't quite see what exactly needed to be redacted?
The testimony of the whistleblowers about obstruction of justice by the Department of Justice is serious and legitimate. And actually, we need to subpoena those individuals from DOJ, put them under oath, and have them testify about the actions that they took or didn't take to slow walk or allow these allegations to pass the statute of limitations on the crimes. I mean, if that's what's happening, then you have serious evidence of obstruction of justice.
Yeah. Now, there are calls by many people that it's time for a special counsel in this matter. They're calling on Attorney General Merrick Garland to appoint someone. Would you trust that process right now? Would you trust a veteran of the Justice Department to actually do a real investigation into the matters before you?
Given the slow walking of investigations of Democrats, given the aggressive over prosecution, the political prosecutions of Republicans, including Donald Trump, over his issues and the aggressive political prosecution in New York, I would have doubts about Merrick Garland having any ability to be trusted to appoint a special counsel who would be independent.
Also, if there were to be a move for a special counsel, you talk about the slow walking and sort of restarting the process all over again. Would you allow, or would you believe that a special counsel would impede the progress of congressional oversight and investigation, or would you just go on your own track regardless?
Well, that's an interesting question. We are interested in moving aggressively and moving swiftly, and I think that Congress can get to the bottom of a lot of it if we have cooperation from the Justice Department. If we don't, then you end up with a political kind of standoff, and a special counsel may be warranted to be able to get to the bottom of it. But I'm not sure that we've reached that point because Congress has essentially moved aggressively into an investigatory phase where the House is gaining the information that we need.
And you're right, between oversight, judiciary, ways and means under Chairman Smith, and Homeland Security, there's multiple avenues right now that are being investigated, and all of them incredibly relevant. One other question on this, Congressman Klein. We're hearing reports out of the U.S. Senate from Republican senators, won't put their name on these anonymous leaks quite yet, but they're saying, why put us through an impeachment right now? Because we don't have the votes to convict Biden in the Senate, so let's not play political games. How do you respond to that?
Well, former Senator Biden entered the Senate the year I was born. So he has long relationships with a lot of these senators, and it wouldn't surprise me if some of them don't want to or don't see the need to pursue one of their old friends from their days in the Senate. So there are a lot of those relationships that are going to come to bear in the Senate, but it should not stop us from getting to the bottom of what is happening with the Biden family, the pay-to-play operation that's been going on, his neglect of the border, and holding him accountable in the People's House of Representatives.
Yeah, and an impeachment process in the House of Representatives moving forward, regardless of what might happen in the Senate, certainly rises to the Nancy Pelosi standard that we saw over the last several years, too. Congressman Klein, on another note, I saw you take to Twitter earlier to comment on Bidenomics, something that the president is actually proud of. And this has to do with the Fed today raising interest rates again. Our economy is still hanging by a thread. States like Virginia, with good leadership from Governor Youngkin, actually seems to be doing okay despite the federal government's policies. But is the Reserve at this point, the Federal Reserve, really just sort of playing smoke and mirrors here to try to make the economy a little more stable than it really is?
Well, the Fed has not been helping us, by responding to the inflation that's out there. Delayed increases in interest rates are having an effect on the economy. The ripple effect is still being felt by Americans at the pocketbooks, in the grocery store, at the gas station. So while it may be declining, it's still a lot higher than it was when Donald Trump was in office. Americans don't forget that, and that's why they're holding this administration responsible for the shoddy economy that we're going through right now.
So do you think the interest rates right now are inflated just to offset the inflation numbers, or do you think interest rates actually are being? I'm not quite sure if I understand your position on this.
Well, I think that the Fed has acted to respond to inflation. When they do, they're usually late to the game. But I do think that they are not very effective at managing or addressing inflation. And that was the point that I was trying to make.
Gotcha. And of course, the White House would tell you that, hey, gas prices have dropped since their highs and inflation is actually improving. They don't seem to actually take those numbers all the way back to the first day of his presidency. Have you noticed that?
I have. And, you go through the amount of increases in prices, whether it's at the gas station or at the grocery store, and then look at whether real wages have gone up accordingly. They haven't. So what you have is essentially a pay cut for the American people that is on Joe Biden's watch, that is his responsibility and the responsibility of the Democrats who voted for the excess spending that we saw over the last 2 years. So we've got to rein in spending. We've got to make sure that we are fiscally responsible, something Congress has forgotten how to do. And that's how we get inflation under control.
Last question they want voters to address is, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Thanks, Congressman Klein. More to come on O'Connor Tonight. It's been announced that the White House press office, led by Karine Jean-Pierre, is going to be banning some reporters from press briefings starting July 31st. One of those reporters, the White House correspondent for Daily Signal, which is a right-of-center news outlet, is named Fred Lucas. He does a really good job. But apparently, Karine Jean-Pierre and the rest of the White House, they don't like the questions he's been asking. So he'll be disinvited, banned, just kicked out of the press briefings. Don't need to deal with those nasty questions anymore. You know who would have loved to have been able to operate under these rules? This guy, Sean Spicer. Of course, you can find everything he's doing over on his very dynamic YouTube channel. Sean Spicer, thanks for joining us, sir.
Thanks for having me. I mean, this is, you said it best. I didn't even fathom something like this. And I think that this is so much bigger than this in terms of this isn't about, I agree with you. Fred Lucas does great work at the Daily Signal. This is about all small outlets. And this has become, Larry, it gets worse because what happens is the White House has created a new criteria, which was the opposite of what I did, which is I let more, not less in. And the way that it's happening is that it's going to benefit the legacy medias, the NBCs, the Washington Post, the Associated Presses. So that's why you have absolute silence from the White House Correspondents Association, people who normally preach about the First Amendment and media access. Kelly O'Donnell from NBC, the head of the organization, has yet to say a single thing about this. These are the same people who always talk about the need for more media access, protecting the First Amendment, the rights of the media, et cetera. And they're absolutely silent and complicit because as long as people like Fred Lucas and any other independent journalists and smaller media outlets can't get in, then NBC and Kelly O'Donnell and that figure that they're going to control the dialogue more. And so this is like it goes well beyond what Corinne Jean-Pierre and the White House are doing. This is literally, and by the way, it's a complete circle, just so everyone understands. In order to join the White House Correspondents Association, the first thing they ask you is, do you have a hard pass? Right? And so if you can't get the hard pass, you can't join the organization, which would advocate for more people getting the thing. I mean, they've created their own little fiefdom here to make sure that only the right people on the left have access to come in and question the press secretary.
Yeah. 100% right, Sean. And also, it reinforces the idea that the president and the operation at the White House is not the president of the United States, it's the president of Washington, D.C. You did something extraordinary when you were press secretary. You opened up these briefings to reporters outside of Washington, in other cities and other places across the country who had very important local concerns that they would ask questions about that would never occur to anyone in that room. And now, instead of following your lead, they've actually gone in the exact opposite direction.
Yeah, but and again, this gets back to it. Here's the funny thing. I mentioned press access, right? These guys all love to talk about it. When I opened up the briefing room to Skype to bring in reporters from local outlets, I mean, these are local affiliates, right? This isn't, I mean, I brought in some people from Providence, from Ohio, all over the country to ask questions that were important in their communities, talk show hosts. I mean, we made it more. What did the press do? They complained because, again, they want to control the narrative. They want to make sure that they're the ones setting the table for what everyone else in the country has to hear and read and see, and that they're the ones who are getting to stand up and ask the question, so they get their clip. So they love to preach about this. And again, this gets back to this idea right now, as the White House clamps down on media access, you're not hearing a peep from the Washington Post or people like Kelly O'Donnell who are supposed to be advocating for this. So and this is why I know this is like a bridge too far, but when I watch all of these people on the right parade off to the White House Correspondents' Dinner and go rub shoulder to all these people, here's my point. You're supporting this. If you're on the right and you want to go off and do this, that the money that they raise and the support and all the attention they get, this is what they do with it. So you are complicit. If you are on the right and you want to go hang out at those dinners, then don't be pretending that you're some kind of solid conservative that's standing up for conservative media. You're not.
Yeah, that's a very important point. Also, by the way, Sean, I'd love for you to comment on the fact that this move is happening just as the news cycle finally starts to get overwhelming for this White House, with all of the scandals, with the Republicans moving toward impeachment inquiries and undeniable corroboration of evidence from the IRS whistleblowers last week, and more problems for the president's son, Hunter, and the entire Biden family. Now they're actually limiting access. And you're right, reporters are playing along with it. Those two things aren't coincidental.
No, but this gets back to the idea is that if, you look at something like the Media Research Center, who shows that there's been zero coverage of this on the major network. So you don't want to be called out. You don't want to be questioned. You don't want a question shouted out by a guy like Fred Lucas from the Daily Signal or a whole host of these other folks, showing that you're not doing your job. So NBC and ABC and CBS can continue not to cover this if they know that no one else is going to ask a question, because then they can say, well, it didn't even come up in the briefing room. Of course it didn't, because no one asked it, because the rest of you are complicit. But like I said, Larry, I get a kick out of the fact that these guys love to wrap themselves around the First Amendment and talk about the media and press access. And they're not. They're a bunch of complicit state TV folks.
Well said. Listen, if I could ask you to comment on something else that I know you're very passionate about, going back to your days at the RNC during 2012 and 2016, when you were responsible for sort of the terms of engagement on the Republican debates. We have our first debate now scheduled for late August. First of all, how do you think the criteria is working out here in terms of the number of donors you need to have, what your standing is in the polls? Do you think that the RNC is approaching this in the right way?
Well, first, you mentioned my YouTube channel. I'm going to be out in Milwaukee. We're going to have the new show up and running then. So if you want to be part of this, go to Sean M. Spicer on YouTube, because we'll be broadcasting from there. And I think that, like, to answer your question, look, I led this effort in 2015 for the first time ever. No political party had ever controlled their primary debates until I did it in 2015. I think they should have built on the success we made in 2015. I think that they are going in a back direction. But with respect to the criteria alone, 40,000 unique donors, 220 states, I think it's good. Look, you're not going to be president of the United States and you're not going to be our nominee if you can't get people to give you at least $1 within our party. I'm sorry. It's August. It's the end of August, to be honest, because it's August 23rd, the first debate. The Iowa caucuses are January 15th. If you can't get 40,000 people in our country to give you at least $1, you're not going to do it. The polling requirement at 1%, I think it's important as well, because again, if you're not getting 1%, then you're not to win. Okay, but and here's what you asked about the criteria. Where I think the RNC is going to have a problem is that and I've been tweeting about this extensively, they said in their rules, and it's on their website, that you have to have 700 likely Republican primary or caucus goers. Why that matters is that media organizations, the Washington Post, ABC, NBC, whomever, right, when they do a poll, likely voters is much more expensive than all voters, registered voters, citizens. It's what we call a screen. And then to get to likely voters, you usually have to get someone who's voted in 2 of 4 elections. It just costs a lot more. You have to be on the phone a lot more to find those people that are willing to take the poll. Media organizations aren't in the business. They don't care. That's more of a inside baseball number that you care about. When the RNC set that threshold, they're going to make it very difficult go to the Real Clear Politics site right now. Find me a single poll, national poll, that has had 700 likely voters. They can't. And the RNC is going to have a problem, because as soon as you start changing the criteria, which they're going to do, I've talked to people that are saying that the morning consult poll that came out at the beginning of July, which is 3,000 potential voters, they're counting. My point is, okay, well, that's not what the rules say.
That's not likely voters, right? I mean, in fact, Sean, not to cut you up, but at this moment, do any of the candidates qualify under the likely voters criteria?
No, there hasn't been a single one in the window. The polling window is July 1st to August 21st. And here's the point, though, is that it's a nuance, but it's important, because as soon as you change it and say, okay, we'll allow the morning consult poll because that's his potential. Well, Doug Burgum and Asa Hutchinson are going to say, well, I got a poll too. Let this one. Yeah. You're at 2%. You can't keep changing the criteria and moving the goalpost after you've said it. And I think that that's where the RNC is going to have a problem. And they're just going to hope that nobody says anything. Maybe they get away with it the first debate. I don't think so going forward.
Real fast, only got a minute left. Your former boss, President Trump, he's suggesting that he might not participate in this first couple of debates. What do you think of that? You think that's a good idea?
Absolutely. What a waste of his time. If I were him, I'd skip the debate, counter program it, go on with Tucker Carlson. I mean, he can come on with me on my new show on my YouTube channel. I'm fine with that, but I just don't know that that's up to his level. But why would you stand on stage with a bunch of people who are dying to get to 1%? You're the former president of the United States. You led the party through 2 cycles. Why would you sit on stage so that a bunch of ankle biters could throw swords? So you join them when they're at 15%. But you don't need to get on there and introduce yourself like, hi, I'm Donald Trump. I'm a Libra. I like walks on the beach. They know who you are. You're not in the same category as Doug Burgum and Asa Hutchinson. I'm sorry. This would be an absolute time. And I guarantee you, if he does Tucker Carlson on Twitter or something, he'll get more viewers than they will.
You got to leave it there. Sean Spicer knows what he's talking about. That's why you need to subscribe to his YouTube channel. Can't wait to see that new show, Sean Spicer on YouTube. Thanks, sir. There's more to come on O'Connor Tonight. It's late July, and here in North America, we're experiencing some heat waves because, well, as I mentioned, it's late July, summertime. We always have heat waves. But according to National Public Radio, which you pay for, by the way, they claim that these would be virtually impossible without climate change. I mean, they have a study that tells them that. And of course, Hillary Clinton, she took that information and decided to tell you that if you're feeling the heat, if you're uncomfortable, if you're miserable, thank a MAGA Republican for it. You can't make it up. Joining us now to talk some sanity to this insanity is Daniel Turner, Executive Director of Power of the Future. Well, there you go. I mean, maybe it's me, but I think summertime, end of July, early August, we always feel it. It's always kind of hot, but no, it's climate change, Daniel Turner.
Yeah, this happens every summer because look, the heat is more oppressive. The heat is more intolerable. We do better in winter because you stay indoors, you make a fire, you put on a coat, and so the heat is, it's a sexier subject to talk about. But it's ridiculous that every summer we do this. Just as a reminder for your great audience, we had in North America the coldest June in over 30 years. It didn't make the news because no one cared. But when you have a couple of hot days in July, hold the press.
Yeah, although let me quibble with you for a minute here because you just said that the heat is intolerable. It's about 98 degrees in Washington, D.C. today, but I tolerated it because I stayed indoors and I was able to plug in an air conditioner and turn it on, thanks to electricity and thanks to fossil fuels. So actually, it's quite tolerable thanks to power and innovation and actually drilling for oil and gas.
Yeah, and now you're speaking my language. It's what's made it possible for humanity to flourish. And you look at the correlation between the fossil fuel boom, which started in around 1850, and the population of the world exploding. And the reason why is because we could live in more places, hot and cold, and we could produce enough food for us, and we could come up with medicines and clothing and all sorts of products that made life better. So when you look at what fossil fuels have done, the environmentalists will say the Earth is 2 degrees warmer Celsius and the oceans are 6 inches higher. And even if that were true, I'd say great. Because look at how much humanity has flourished. Look how much we've prospered, and look how much better our quality of life is. Henry VIII would have longed for the type of comfort and privilege we have in our life right now.
This is a great point. If you look at the United States of America, population has absolutely exploded over the last 100 years in places like Arizona, Nevada, Texas, Oklahoma, Florida. That's because of fossil fuels and it's because of air conditioning. And now they're saying, oh, it's so hot in these very same places in the desert that we've got to do away with electricity. We've got to do away with carbon emissions. You do away with carbon emissions, you do away with electricity, and you literally can't live in those places.
Absolutely. And the cold is what kills more people than the heat. And that's important to remember because, yeah, for some reason we don't like the heat and we feel it a little bit more oppressively. But we tolerate the heat a lot better than we tolerate the cold. 4 times as many people die from cold than from heat. And so when you have this administration which is using heat, using the summer to push an agenda that punishes reliable appliances, reliable energy security, where it's really felt on the back end is when we get to the winter, because that's when it becomes, quite frankly, deadly.
Well, and that's another point. You're right. I mean, they look at these temperatures and they say this is why we have to do something about climate change. And how do they address it? They make gas more expensive for people who are working and trying to commute and drive their pickup to their job as a plumber or an HVAC repairman. Oh, and speaking of HVAC, they want to do away with your oil and natural gas heater so that you can't warm your home in the wintertime. And they want to do away with your gas stove. In other words, they want to do away with all the conveniences that we middle American, middle income, middle class people love in this country, but they never address, the private jets or the giant limousines that the rich elites who love pushing climate change agenda on the rest of us always get to enjoy.
Yeah, well, that's very similar that we saw with COVID a couple of years ago, how if you were the decision makers pushing these lockdowns, you were also exempted from those lockdowns. And your excuse was, I'm important. I'm the governor. I have to get my hair done. I have to go to dinner with important constituents. And you'll see the same with the climate agenda. John Kerry still has his private jet. Of course, he blames his wife for it, but he still uses it. Joe Biden flies to Delaware every weekend for his getaways. He's never once said, I'm just going to stay in the White House for a smaller carbon footprint. So the elites will always exempt themselves from the carbon punishment that they want the rest of us to endure.
By the way, I want to reach a point in my life where I have to blame my wife for the private jet. in our house, right? I mean, God, honestly, I mean, say what you will about John Kerry, he's doing something right. All right, this then, of course, Daniel Turner, brings us to the natural transition to eating bugs. Take a look
Yeah.
at this. It was just what, 4 years ago when NPR said that companies face an uphill battle trying to get Americans to eat bugs because, no one likes to eat bugs. Now, in 2023, they say it's a right wing conspiracy theory about eating bugs. And oh, by the way, it's racist. But no. They really do want to push eating bugs on us because they claim cows and cow flatulence contributes to climate change. Isn't that right?
Absolutely, and they're punishing the farming industry, particularly in Europe, very, very aggressively. We saw what happened in Sri Lanka just last year when they finally they caught up to all of their going green movement, caught up to them, and the country was in absolute starvation, and there was a revolution. And so, yeah, that hasn't hit America yet, but it will. And just as your audience may remember, it was not long ago, pre-COVID, back when times were a little bit more normal, that presidential candidates talked very comfortably about banning certain foods, about regulating cheeseburgers. Or they would show them at the Iowa State Fair and ask questions, should we be able to ban cheeseburgers? And Kamala Harris, the senator at the time, said, well, we have to have a conversation about that. So forcing bugs on us would be nothing surprising because this mentality thinks they can regulate every aspect of your life, including your diet.
But Daniel, by the way, full disclosure here, Buck Sexton and I, one night in Mexico City, had deep fried crickets on our guacamole. All right. It wasn't to save the planet, though. It was because we had been drinking tequila all day. It happened. We did it as a joke. But at the White House, when they have a state dinner, or at Davos, when they're meeting to inflict climate policies on the rest of the world, they always dine out on steak or lobster or maybe pheasant. They don't have bugs on the menu, do they?
No, they don't. And they also have these summits in the most beautiful cities. The next one, which is going to happen in just a couple months, the COP28 is going to be in Dubai. Of course, Dubai has nothing to do with fossil fuels, right? So that makes perfect sense. But they never have these climate
And they
summits.
never use air conditioning in Dubai, God forbid.
No, never at all. But they never have these summits in Raqqa, right? They seem to avoid Bangladesh. They never go to the Congo. I just want to know, when is John Kerry ever going to have a climate summit? Not in Paris, not in Bilderberg, not in Geneva, not in Dubai, but in one of these third world countries that he's trying to save from the wraths of climate change. They never seem to care about those countries enough to actually go there.
That's right. No, he'll have those summits there when hell freezes over, which of course it never will because of climate change. We'll have to leave it there. Daniel Turner, Power of the Future. Thanks for joining us, sir.
You got it. Thanks, Larry.
I'm going to crank up my air conditioning now, just to tick off a liberal. There's more to come on O'Connor tonight. Keep it here at Salem News Channel. If you haven't noticed, liberals, progressives, people who really care about your rights, just ask them, seem to be very concerned about you exercising one particular right, freedom of speech. Look at this extraordinary moment on MSNBC yesterday.
Well, right. This is the challenge because domestically speech is protected by the First Amendment, and that has been interpreted very, very broadly to protect almost everything including things that can sound pretty threatening unless they cross over the line into sort of what's called a true threat. And that means
it's a real challenge that the freedom of speech is being broadly interpreted. Why would that be a challenge? Joining us right now is Mary Catherine Ham. She's the host of the Getting Hammered podcast, and her book with our colleague and friend Guy Benson is End of Discussion. And well, you talked about this in your book several years ago. They don't want to hear dissenting voices, and they're very concerned about you exercising your freedom of speech.
No, and I think it's gotten worse since the book, which is great for the book, End of Discussion, available everywhere, but bad for America because journalists are ostensibly purveyors of free speech. They should be its biggest champions. And yet again and again, in a way that it wasn't, I would say 10, 15 years ago, journalists just say, look, we or the government, even worse, know what the truth is. You guys are bad at the truth. You are misinformation and disinformation, even though, by the way, all your misinformation, disinformation ends up becoming an actual truth at some point when we find out the real deal. So like, we're in charge and you guys shouldn't be able to speak. And there did used to be a sort of default cultural understanding that raucous debate and wide berths for speech were good, especially among journalists. And we have lost that. And here's somebody on TV, and the journalist just saying, like, it's very problematic that we have such a broad interpretation of speech in this country.
You'd think, though, Mary Catherine, that there'd be some sense of self-awareness coming after the 2020 election and the censorship of the Hunter Biden laptop story, where, a year and a half later, the New York Times admits, oh, yeah, maybe that story was true. And here we've got Hunter Biden appearing in court today with this. I mean, do they not hear themselves after literally censoring and canceling the New York Post?
No, what they don't want to hear themselves. There is what's lacking in journalism is introspection, right? Occasionally you'll get a tiny little correction appended to a story and nobody ever hears about it, right? But nobody actually does the soul searching. There will be like a week after an election with, for instance, 2016 with Trump, when every single industry expert got basically everything wrong. And they'll spend like a week going, how did that happen? But then they spend 4 years going, that didn't happen. And this Russia story is going to prove that didn't happen, right?
Right.
Well, it turns that was mis and disinformation. They don't look inward to solve these problems. I don't think they want to be honest brokers in a lot of cases. And those that might want to be honest brokers, by the way, they know every cultural signal in the news is that if you want to talk about Hunter Biden in a rational way that doesn't give him a pass, you ain't getting promoted. Like, I'd have a much better gig at this point. Not that talking to you is bad, Larry, but I'd have a much better gig if I had gone the other direction on Hunter Biden.
Oh, you and me both, honey. But can we just listen? I know this is about journalism, and I know that people look at this story and they think, well, it's just because they're all liberal, they're all Democrats, they're on their side. It goes deeper than that, doesn't it? It's not just about left-right politics. I think it has more to do about them realizing they're losing their influence in this new age of technology.
No, I think that's part of it. They're scared that they're not in as great control as they were before. I think generationally there's a switch where older journalists actually did think that viewpoints should be heard, even if they didn't agree with those viewpoints. A new generation doesn't actually believe that. I'm sure you saw the polling among millennials and the shocking number that think misgendering someone should be a crime. So we have a cultural issue, and it has come to the newsroom for sure. And so the blocking of viewpoints is what they're into too often. And they also are very secure in the idea that the government apparatus built to do that will behoove them and not us. And honestly, they're right. So they feel very comfortable saying, no, there should be a ministry of truth. Nina Jankowicz seems great because she's going to shut down us. She's not shutting down them.
Mary Catherine Ham. The Getting Hammered podcast, by the way, is incredibly entertaining and fun. Of course, it's coming out of the Free Beacon shop, and they do great stuff over there. So good stuff. Thanks. It's all good to have you. Thanks for joining us on the video show.
We'll do it again.
Well, yeah, as long as we have a First Amendment right to do so, which, well,
Nina's coming for us.
I think we're okay. Thanks, Mary Catherine. That's it for tonight. We'll be back same time, same place tomorrow, right here where you found us, wherever you're streaming us, wherever you downloaded us, wherever you Roku'd us. In the meantime, I'll see you on the radio.